And I know you just had a big interview with a good friend of mine, Paul Zimnisky, about lab. And he had some interesting things to say.
He did, and I want to get your take. So I have been writing for the month of March, which is closing at the point when people will be hearing this, but a lab-grown special report for JCK that goes out every Wednesday. So for the one that comes out tomorrow, so again, this will be a week old when people listen, I spoke to Paul Zimnisky, who I have interviewed before, and he's a very astute analyst, has been an analyst for at least a decade, but I think probably a lot longer, specializing in the diamond trade. And you'd recommended, thankfully, that I reach out to him, and I found it to be a very intriguing conversation. He certainly echoed what you just said, this sense that the narrative about lab-grown diamonds is changing, that people are finally ready to kind of acknowledge that the price cannot go down any further in the wholesale market. I mean, Paul said it was down something like 90 to 95% from a decade ago, from 2015, when the product began going mainstream. One thing he said was that most of the growth in that sector has been driven not by consumer demand, but by retailers who are a bit drunk on margins. You know, the kinds of margins that you can get selling lab grown, which could be 85 and maybe even 90% versus 20 to 40% on natural diamonds. And so, of course, you have to sell a greater volume, a much greater volume, to make up for the amount that these are selling for. But I was struck by that because I think watching this market, the lab grown frenzy, as it were, kind of building over the last, especially since the pandemic, I just had it in my head. I think I just assumed, well, of course, this narrative that, you know, lab grown producers have spun about their product being more sustainable and about you don't have to spend 2 or 3 months salary on a diamond here, get the biggest rock you can. And I always just assumed that demand was bubbling up from the market itself, from consumers. Is that a known argument that it's really about retailers driving this product into consumer hands as opposed to the other way around?
It's hard to get solid stats on it. I know, obviously, for a long time, retailers were making a lot of money on lab grown, and they were incentivized to sell it. And especially since natural diamonds are more comparison shopped. I think we're starting to see that change, but in general, natural diamonds are more comparison shopped. They had the opportunity to make a bigger margin, and it's an easier sale because it's a cheaper sale. I've talked to a lot of retailers who don't like the product and thought they would never carry the product, who said they had to just because people were asking for it. So I do think some of it is consumer driven and was consumer driven. And you are seeing circumstances where there are retailers who want to kind of rebalance the amount of natural versus lab grown they sell. And they're having a tough time because a lot of people in their area have already embraced lab grown. And it is kind of, you know, after all these years of saying they're basically the same product, to all of a sudden saying, well, natural has these characteristics which are different. It's tough. It's not easy. So I think for a lot of retailers, it was a great product for a long time. You know, they were very frustrated because they weren't making good margins on diamonds and they were heavily comparison shopped. And all of a sudden you have this product, which, as we all know, is very cheap wholesale, and the consumers think they're getting a deal because they don't compare lab grown prices to other lab grown retailers. They compare it to natural prices. So, hey, you're getting a deal. It's $2,000 less than natural or $3,000 less than natural, but they may actually be paying $500 more than they can get it online or get it from Lightbox or from somebody else. But I think that's right. I think that was a big driver of it. I think if those margins weren't there, we wouldn't be where we are.
Right. Well, just to conclude, one of the big takeaways I had from our conversation was he was very clear. Retailers who sell lab grown really need to segregate that product. So open another store, which I know we've spoken to Constance from Zachary's Jewelers, who was on our podcast late last year. They opened a second store that focused on lab grown. And so that seems like the right strategy. It's like, okay, fine, offer them. People should be able to buy them. There's nothing wrong with them as a product, but don't confuse your clientele. Don't muddy the waters of your own merchandise.
Right. And I would say also lab grown with a few exceptions that we know about, Prada and Breitling, really has not penetrated the luxury space, the high-end space. And I think there were hopes originally that it would, but now with the price going down, my guess is that high-end brands would probably be less interested in getting involved in it just because of it's a product that the value is very quickly depreciating.